What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
What's up, Fantasy Points? This is Outside the Box for Week 16, looking at the NFL main slate on Sunday. If you're here watching the show live rather than watching football, I mean, good on you. That's impressive. If you're choosing to stick with us, to talk with us while there is football being played, we appreciate you. I'm of course here with Master of Dank Stats, Scott Barrett, also CEO of Fantasy Points. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure you're subscribed to the Fantasy Points YouTube channel, like the video, all of that, commenting, all of that is helpful for the algorithm. We would appreciate it. Scott, how are you doing on this fine Saturday?
I'm doing good. I'm feeling good. I'm excited to break down this slate. Feel like I'm playing my best DFS right now. Yeah, I think we're going to win $1 million drafting a team live. I think that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, no, I think this is the week for sure that we are going to win $1 million on this slate. Gonna need your help though, because I am not totally sure what I think is the play to win $1 million. So let's go position by position. We're gonna start at quarterback. Each position we're gonna go take a brief look at the chalk, talk about whether it is good chalk or bad chalk. Then we'll move on and try to find some of those outside the box plays that the show is named after. So starting at quarterback, the highest owned is Michael Penix, projected for 19% ownership. He's only 4,500, making his first NFL start. Scott, how are we feeling about Michael Penix?
It's an amazing matchup. Giants defense, absolutely awful. He's an underrated, or I don't know, underrated, but like he's a good player. He's a top 10 pick. He led all quarterbacks in passing yards his last 2 seasons in college football. He had 9,700 something. No other quarterback was over 8,500. He's also one of these quarterbacks who's seen his stock sort of rise despite not playing, because he had Rome Odunze, round 1 pick, Jalen Polk, round 2 pick, Jalen McMillan, round 3 pick. All those guys have kind of underwhelmed. And so it's sort of like a reverse Mettenberger, where it's like, well, maybe Penix, was the true superstar. That team, Washington, also, they went from like 14-1 to, 8-8 this year. But yeah, it's 8.5 point favorites. I think Atlanta is going to go crazy run heavy here and have success doing that. There's also the comment from Darnell Mooney, which was that he hadn't caught a pass from Penix all year prior to this week. And so quarterback chemistry is a real thing. That's some concern. Ultimately, he's going to be your cash quarterback of the week just because he's so cheap. And, maybe he'll be like a small field, single entry, double spy quarterback. If you really love the rest of your lineup, he's our top point per dollar value at the position, but probably not someone I'm going to play into ownership.
Am I supposed to know what a reverse Mettenberger is? I mean, I kind of get it from context, but Mettenberger was a quarterback who was good, I assume, because he had good receivers. Is that?
He was a quarterback who had Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry.
Okay.
And so some people thought he was good, and it's like, oh no, he's horrible. He just had really sick wide receivers.
Okay, that makes sense. Anthony Richardson, the second highest projected ownership. He's 5,400 against Tennessee. How are we feeling about Richardson?
Yeah, I don't get this. Maybe you can explain it to me. He's been like 4% each of the last 5 weeks, and I'll write him up all the way at the end of the article as a contrarian play, where it's like, okay, this guy hits 27 DraftKings fantasy points and 30% of his career starts, and he scores single digits the rest of the time. And now he's chalk. Now he's like randomly chalk, uber chalky. So I don't really get that. The guy has the worst completion percentage since Tim Tebow, the third fewest completions per game of any quarterback since pre-Vietnam. I'm just not going to play him into ownership.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. I don't know that I had any great reason other than he's kind of inexpensive, I guess, is the best reason to play him. And like you said, he does have major upside, which kind of then it becomes an ownership play always. When you get these players that have really low floor, really high ceiling, then it's kind of like, all right, if they don't get ownership, then I'll play and hope for the best. If they do get a lot of ownership, then it's generally going to be a stay away spot. And I think that makes some sense for Anthony Richardson. I will say Over the past 5 weeks, 20.4 fantasy points per game for Anthony Richardson. So I think maybe that's part of it. He's been a little bit more consistent recently. But yeah, getting a good amount of ownership. Caleb Williams, third here at 5,500 against Detroit. How do you feel about Caleb Williams?
Yeah, I think he's good chalk. I think 10% is fair when you look at wide receivers, which we'll get to. Well, you can just filter by the wide receiver position. You'll see DJ Moore and Keenan Allen projecting as the top 2 point per dollar values at the wide receiver position, and then Jahmyr Gibbs is the most obvious bring back in outside the box history. And so like Caleb Williams stinks this year, worst ever quarterback season in fantasy points data history by catchable throw rate or pressure to sack ratio, two of like the most important stats I would cite when evaluating quarterback play. But he has had productive fantasy games, including 26 points against the same Lions defense a few weeks ago. This defense is significantly worse, one of the most injured defenses I've ever seen. So I think when you factor in the stackable upside, 10%, I think that's, if anything, a little low.
Yeah, no, Caleb Williams is one of the first quarterbacks that stood out to me on this slate against the depleted Detroit. Like you love this kind of game where you're playing against a really good offense and a really bad now defense, really banged up defense, just kind of an ideal spot for Caleb Williams. Kyler Murray, 6,100, getting 8% ownership against Carolina. How do you feel about Kyler Murray?
Yeah, John Proctor says it every week. Kyler Murray's a Ponzi scheme, right? So are we going to play him as the fourth highest owned quarterback? I don't know. The matchup is amazing. The stack seems fairly easy to me with Trey McBride and a great matchup, a great schematic matchup. It's just like he's averaging 16 fantasy points per game. That's like 4 below his career average. The team's jacked up their pass rate over expectation. Like they're top 5 over the last 5 weeks, up from bottom 5 still. Like he's averaging like 12 fantasy points per game over that span. I don't know what's gone wrong, but something's clearly gone wrong. I think it's more of a James Conner week. I wrote him up and then deleted it but I think that was also last night when he was showing as like 12%. I just think there's more exciting quarterback plays at lower ownership. And so today we're going to talk about a lot of quarterbacks. That's just a function of the slate. Like running back is fairly straightforward. I might only have seven or 8 running backs in my pool with only, with maybe 4 running backs comprising like 75% of my exposure. And so the way to get different is to lean into these stacks, these quarterbacks, which is going to be the true difference makers on most slates. The more important variable. So there's a lot of quarterbacks to talk about. I'm seeing a lot sub 4%. I think are really interesting.
All right. So I think I'm on the other side there. Maybe it's because I'm wish casting with Kyler a little bit. Him being on my season-long team. Just the matchup is so good, and the leverage off of James Conner to me is so good.
Fair.
Although I believe you told me last week that there's actually positive correlation with James Conner and Kyler.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, it was really high for quarterback running. It was like 0.31. I don't know what it is now, but because Conner just had his massive blow up game.
Right. So maybe we can actually play them together here too. Would be kind of a interesting way to go about it. But yeah, that's I understand wanting to fade it if you like some other spots better. But yeah, I think I'm going to be playing it. Joe Burrow, just 5% ownership at 7,500. Is he one of those players that you like?
Yeah, it's a really good spot. Well, it's a great schematic matchup. It's a pretty good on paper matchup. The big concern obviously is no Jameis. We're getting DTR. If we were getting Jameis, like Burrow would be like 20%, Jameis would be like 25%. Over under would be massive. And so we kind of saw this already. We saw, not too many fantasy points from Burrow and the pass catchers in this game. It was a game that DTR had 20 plus pass attempts. Winston got benched. Watson got benched, and then Jameis came in late. There's a chance Jameis comes in late and like saves the day. But yeah, big concern is that DTR doesn't at all push the Bengals. And so it's a Chase Brown plus Bengals defense week, kind of leaning more in that favor, but it's still like undeniable upside here. Burrow's just been unreal. He has an NFL record 6 straight games with 250 plus passing yards and 3 plus passing touchdowns. He's averaging 330 yards per game, 27 DraftKings fantasy points per game over that span. Obviously, there's massive upside to the stack since week 5. Chase leads all wide receivers in fantasy points per game by like 7. T. Higgins is a top 5 wide receiver by fantasy points per game. So clearly upside there. Probably projects as more of a Chase Brown game, but still value that upset, that stack.
How about I think this is the point where I should probably open it up to you because we've kind of gone over all the chalk. You want me to keep naming names?
Just keep naming names. Yeah,
happy to keep naming names. Aiden O'Connell is a quarterback that I have some interest in at 5,100 in the elite matchup against Jacksonville. Do you have any interest in Aiden O'Connell?
Yeah, well, I was really on him a few weeks ago in a great matchup against the Buccaneers, and he left that game early. He also wasn't really doing much before he got hurt. But there's just so much upside to the stack because this offense is so heavily condensed around Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers. AOC favors Bowers a little bit more than Myers this season, what we've seen at least. Jaguars are like the best possible matchup for quarterbacks and for pass catchers. On top of that, Sincere McCormick's out. So I really think they have to lean pass heavy. We just saw Rodgers break the slate. Like every top 50 lineup in any tournament was a Rodgers stack. So maybe AOC can do the same thing at a cheap price tag. And again, the stack is pretty easy. So BTJ on the bring back. I think he's a really strong play.
Yep. I mean, Josh Allen has put up back-to-back 40 to 50 point fantasy games. He's up to 8,700. If he was going to put up another 40 burger, you'd probably want him again. He's getting 3% ownership. I'm struggling with what to do with Josh Allen. Do we just play him? What are you thinking?
Yeah, he averages 28.5 DK fantasy points per game over his last 9. That would be the most by any quarterback in any season all time. He's hit 25 at least in 4 straight games, averages 38 over that span. And so top 7 matchup against the Patriots, like he can absolutely go nuclear if he wanted to go nuclear. The concern here is that he generally only goes nuclear when the team actually needs him to be Superman. And then he answers because he is Superman. In 1-score games, he's averaging 36 fantasy points per game. In all other games, 20.2. And so that's really the concern, but it's just, you kind of never really know with Josh Allen. It's just, if he wants to run in 3 touchdowns and throw for another 2, like he can certainly do that. I think James Cook is interesting as a contrarian play. But we can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, that's an interesting call out. Sam Darnold getting 3% ownership, 6,500. Any interest there?
Yeah, well, it's not just that he's getting 3% ownership. It's also that Jordan Addison is getting 4% ownership. And so that seems off. Justin Jefferson is at like 1% ownership. Hawkinson's the projected highest owned receiver, and he's still not very high up there either. You've seen the Vikings. They already ranked 4th in pass rate over expectation this year, but that's doubled since week 11. And Darnold, 24 DraftKings fantasy points per game over that span, only 1 game under 19.5. We just saw Darnold doubles break the slate nearly 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks before that, Darnold and Addison plus Hawkinson also came very close to breaking the slate. It's probably a slightly below average matchup on paper. Over-under is like surprisingly low. But when you're talking about this combined ownership for the stack, I like that. I think there's significant upside there.
Depending on what you want to do with Brock Purdy, you can find some low-owned plays to stack him with as well. 6,300, 3% ownership going to Purdy. Any interest there?
Well, I don't know about low-owned stacking partners, but yeah. So since week 6, if you exclude, remember he missed that 1 game due to injury. There was the blizzard game, and there was like the heavy rain in week 15. And he's a guy who, dating back to college, has always really struggled with precipitation. But if you exclude those 2 games, he's averaging 24 DraftKings fantasy points per game since week 6, despite being down a number of key starters. That would rank 2nd among all slate eligible quarterbacks. if over the full season. They have no healthy running back, so there's a chance that all fantasy production flows through Purdy. It's Miami. They're kind of tricky to sort out. They look like a bottom 3 matchup if over the full season, but they've kind of softened up in recent weeks. Vegas does not see this game shooting out, but I think there's underrated shootout potential. I like Jawan Jennings. I like George Kittle. I like various options on Miami side as well.
Are you going to the Miami side playing any Tua?
I thought about it. So I was way on Tua last week. Because if you just looked over his previous 4 games, he was right up there with any quarterback. He was on like this awesome hot streak. And the hole you poked, Neil, was that, well, he's down his left tackle, and he was, by the way, questionable this week. I don't know if he's going to play or not. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I think they can still get by that. I watched that game. He played like absolute dog shit, but they were so close to making a number of really big plays. But he was really rough in that game. So that might hinge on the left tackle. My note, though, would be Waddle's out, further condensing the target distribution. Tyreek Hill and Jonnu Smith both have perfect schematic matchups where cover 3 and cover 4 is what San Francisco plays a ton of. Tyreek Hill looks like 2023 Tyreek Hill against those coverage shells. Against everything else, he looks like, I don't know, a below average wide receiver or guy who's, I don't know, somewhat dusty. And then you have Malik Washington as a sub 4K value. Jonnu, by the way, 49ers are tough on paper matchup to tight ends. That's always been the case with Fred Warner there in San Francisco. So there's a few different ways you can play it. I think Tua could go off with that, like I said, the favorable schematic matchup for those receivers, and the fact that he was kind of lighting the world on fire prior to last week being down his left tackle. I gave it some serious thought, ultimately not in my write-up. So I did want to go a little in depth on that.
Okay. Any Jared Goff? I mean, same game environment as Caleb Williams, 1% ownership.
Yeah, so he's been awesome this year. Ranked 7th in fantasy points per dropback. He's been held back by volume. He averages 27 pass attempts per game and wins. Would rank second worst among all offenses. But in losses, he's averaging 57 pass attempts per game. I don't think they're going to lose this game against Chicago. But I also could see them leaning significantly more pass heavy. They're down their workhorse running back, David Montgomery. Their defense is just, beleaguered by injury. And then there's tremendous upside to Amon-Ra St. Brown if they lean into the pass. Something like he's averaging like 28 fantasy points per game in the 5 games they've had a positive pass rate over expectation. Bring backs easy with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. You can for sure 1000% stack him with Jahmyr Gibbs. But if you were looking to fade Jahmyr Gibbs, that might be like the best leverage spot. So I do like Jared Goff at 1% ownership. I'm on Ross St. Brown down there as well.
Yeah.
Laporte is trending up.
Yeah. Do you think Montgomery? I mean, I guess we'll talk about Laporte when we get to tight ends. But I'm curious who's going to benefit from Montgomery being out other than Gibbs, if anybody. One more name to throw at you. Bryce Young, any interest there at 5,300? I mean, three of his receivers look like pretty strong value options. Nice matchup. Any interest in Bryce Young?
Is it a nice matchup?
Good question. Yeah, I mean,
I don't think
they're like implied team total is fairly high for.
Yeah, it's like 25% higher than their points scored per game. We couldn't really make sense of that on our projections call. It was kind of confusing to us. But yeah, Bryce Young looked like shit last week, but he was kind of nice for like 4 weeks before that. I think there's better options. He wasn't on my list.
All right. Is there anybody else we need to talk about?
Also, there's a bunch of wide receiver injuries. Xavier Legette is out. Jalen Coker is questionable. I think David Moore, one of the other wide receivers, is questionable. But
yeah. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I guess we should bring up because he is getting 5% ownership as a starting quarterback. Any chance that they just stick to their pass happy ways?
I I think probably because there's a good chance because that's what they did when we first saw DTR. He was averaging like 2 yards per pass attempt, but he had like 25 pass attempts in like a quarter and a half of work. But then again, like you just benched Jameis, who is like awesome minus interception. So I can see them being more conservative. I think just the big takeaway is he's absolute trash. Just the sample that we have from him is just, not really any rushing production and just awful through the air, like sub 5 yards per pass attempt. So, but if you for a milli like insanity stack, you can do DTR plus Njoku plus Chase, and hope he gets there just on raw volume and garbage time.
Anything else to talk about with quarterbacks?
Yeah. Any other names you want to throw at me before I get to my list?
No. Let's hear your list.
Well, Jalen Hurts is one. So I won $25,000 last year, right? And I took $5,000 from that, and I was like, this is my budget. I'm going to go through it all, playing DFS this year, and I'm only down like 900. I have 4,100, so it's like burning a hole in my pocket. And so I want to play 3 lineups in the 5.55 milli. I'm probably not going to because I'm a pussy, but I think I'm only going to do one, and I'm going to paywall that quarterback. If you're a subscriber, just scroll all the way down towards the end of the article. He's there, or hit me up in Discord. I'll tell you who that quarterback is. Right now, that's who I'm playing. But if I did 2 lineups, right? Or if I did 3, the other 2 lineups, one would be a Jalen Hurts stack. The other would be Saquon Barkley. Just make sure he's on that. But right now, Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, they combined for 90 DraftKings fantasy points last week, and now they're combining for 7% projected ownership. Jalen Hurts, just 1% projected ownership. The thing that's the only real difference between him and anyone else is just Eagles ranked dead last, or him and Josh Allen, is the Eagles ranked dead last in pass attempts per game. If he was dropping back as often as Joe Burrow, he'd be averaging 31.4 fantasy points per game. We saw them lean atypically pass heavy last week, despite a worst possible matchup against Pittsburgh's pass defense. Dropped back 38 times, most since week 3. He scored 29. AJ Brown and Devonta Smith both had season highs in targets, season highs in DraftKings fantasy points. Was this just to appease AJ Brown's recent very public frustrations over a lack of target volume? Will this continue? I don't know, but the upside's there. And then even if it's not super heavy with pass volume, like what if Saquon gets stuffed at the 1 3 times and he just falls in? We've seen that play out so many times this season. I like AJ Brown. I like Devonta Smith a little bit more. I think AJ Brown's a little banged up, and it was Devonta who out targeted and outscored him last week. But yeah, I like this. Again, no one's really on it at 1%. And I think there's some really good upside there.
All right.
And if it's not him, I feel like it has to be Saquon. So, but beyond that, I really like Stafford. I might like him more for small field single entry than I do for something like the Millie, but I do really like him. I also like Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers might make more sense. It's like, how would Stafford hit? He would need to get pushed by Rodgers. But I mean, no one really wants to play Cup after his goose egg last week, but the guy still ranks second in targets per route run. But ultimately, this is just me having a ton of conviction in the Puka Nacua to Devontae Adams mini stack. And you could just throw that quarterback in there. You could add Cup to it. But just know I'm going to have a ton of ownership to that mini stack, and I just might also, throw a quarterback on there.
Interesting. All right. Do we want to move on to running backs?
Yeah. One last quarterback, but that's the mystery paywall quarterback. I can give that out in Discord.
All right. Well, we've narrowed it down to like 5 quarterbacks we haven't
I
talked
know
about.
we
So
talked about
we'll
everyone.
be able to figure it out, hopefully. All right. Moving on to running backs. Jahmyr Gibbs is the chalkiest running back maybe we've had on a slate this season, or he's up there, projecting for 40% ownership at 7,500. Obviously, David Montgomery being out is the reason everybody wants to play some Jahmyr Gibbs. How do we feel about 40% ownership?
Yeah, I think he's a must play. I think he's like a lock button. Don't overthink it. I know this is outside the box, Neil, so maybe you can help me work around it. But it's just this, like every single week in the everything report, I was like, hey, just keep in mind if there's ever an injury to one of these running backs, they're gonna automatically win you your fantasy league. Like Detroit running backs in combination average 35.4 fantasy points per game. And so it's like, oh, what if Gibbs only gets 60% of it? He's still the best running back play of the slate. What if he gets 80% of it? It's like, he's breaking DFS this week. So I think you just lock that in at 40%.
Yep. I think that makes sense. I'm going to have a lot of Gibbs also. Man, just tracking. I was in first for a second on a slate here, and then just got knocked out by several teams with Kareem Hunt, who is somehow 8% owned in tournaments today. Brutal stuff. All right. Second chalkiest is James Conner in an elite matchup with Carolina at 7,100. Any interest in James Conner, or how much interest relative to 27% ownership?
Yeah, he's a really good play. And, you're going to hear me on Outside the Box sort of talk up the chalk. Chalk is doing a really good job this week. It's done a really good job this season. You've seen that from, if you look back over tournaments and find the names you recognize, like the pros who win more often than anyone else, you'll see they're sort of just eating the running back chalk every week, and that really hasn't hurt them. James Conner is also good chalk. Trey Benson's out. Amari DeMarcado's out. DJ Dallas is questionable. Conner is coming off of a season high 34 DraftKings fantasy points. The best usage, the highest XFP total of any running back last week. Panthers are the worst run defense in football. Game script's favorable. They do have some offensive line injuries, but that kind of feels negated by a bunch of D-line injuries to Carolina. Ultimately, I think he's a really good play, but to your credit, Neil, he's 27% and Kyler was only 8%.
Right. Chase Brown, is he just Christian McCaffrey now at 7,700? Like, the usage is so good for Chase Brown. How much interest do we have?
Well, the usage is literally like peak Christian McCaffrey. And the production's there as well. He scored 19 fantasy points or more in 6 straight games. His by XFP per game, it's 22% more than any other running back. It's 8.3% more than prime Christian McCaffrey. And so you could argue 7,700, he should probably be like 9,300, right? It's a bottom 3 matchup on paper, but they're 7.5 point favorites up against DTR. And I think that matters. Chase Brown, you see his fantasy points per snap climbs by 60% when leading. So it might be the case where game script's more valuable to him than the matchup is detrimental. I think I buy that personally.
Okay. Chuba Hubbard, again, going back to that Carolina-Arizona matchup that a lot of people are going to be playing, a lot of players from that game. How much interest in Chuba Hubbard?
Yeah, so he is really good. He's probably better leverage on James Conner than Kyler Murray. There's like a tale of 2 different Chuba Hubbards, right? So it's in games, Carolina gets blown out. He's averaging 12.3 fantasy points per game, 12.8 XFP per game. So like high end RB3 numbers. In games, the Panthers haven't lost by multiple scores. Like that's the bar. It's a low bar. Haven't lost by multiple scores. 19 fantasy points per game, 21 XFP per game, top 3 numbers. And so, maybe you play. So that makes them a little tricky for me at 18%. And clearly there's going to be some negative correlation with James Conner. So that's a way to play it. Another way to play it is to stack them up with Carolina's defense for added upside. I'd say 18% feels a little high, but but the potential, if this is a close game, seems really good just because the volume's insane.
Devin Achan, do you have interest in going back there this week? He's still just 7,400, 14% ownership.
Yeah, every week he averages 20 XFP per game, 22 DraftKings fantasy points per game, and Tua starts. Both numbers would rank top 2 among running backs on this slate. We in previous weeks have lamented a lack of goal line usage in favor of Raheem Mostert. That has been the case the last 2 weeks. 100% of the backfield touches inside the 10. So I think he's a great value. I think he's a really strong play. He's another one of these really good, expensive running backs to like.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you include Bijan as one of those really good, expensive running backs to like?
Yeah, he's hit at least 17.5 DK in 8 of his last 9 games, averages like 23. Volume has been even better of late, 22 carries in each of his last 3 games, averages over 100 rushing yards per game. This feels like a great spot. Giants' run defense is absolutely awful, especially after losing some key pieces. And you have this rookie quarterback who hasn't thrown a pass to any of his wide receivers until this week. Kind of makes sense. He would lean heavy on Bijan this week, especially with him, playing as well as he's had over this hot streak.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, that maybe he sees more targets because the wide receivers are not ready, don't have the connection yet. All right, so that's kind of that's everybody above 10%. We've got Taylor and Alexander Madison right at 10%. I thought about playing Alexander Madison in my main season-long team this week. Ultimately, did not play Alexander Madison, but the matchup is so good. It's pretty enticing. Do you think Amir Abdullah, though, is like just going to cut into his workload enough that he's not good enough?
I think so, but it's also, what's the upside? This is like the least valuable backfield in fantasy all year. So I'm personally not going to play him, but I know you're an MME guy, so maybe it makes sense to have some ownership.
Yeah, all of some in MME is just because the matchup is so good against Jacksonville that like anybody can put up fantasy points. So I think even Madison playable there. I don't know, Jonathan Taylor, 6,900, 10% ownership, feels kind of meh to me, but do you have any excitement for Jonathan Taylor?
I'll just say he's run really, really bad with touchdown luck, like not even including him dropping the ball on the 1 yard line. But no, he wasn't on my list. Okay. It's just, he could have 100+ rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. I could see that pretty easily, but maybe not the perfect spot for it. And I think there's other running back plays I like more.
I guess we could just go to the one that I know you like, which is Saquon Barkley at 5% ownership, 8,300. Do you want to tell us about why you like Saquon Barkley?
Yeah, this is just the name of the game in DFS. Is there are players who have the potential to break the slate, and if they hit, you don't make any money, and no chance of finishing first, which is where all the alpha is in DFS tournaments, and like no one has. At least certainly no running back has the slate breaking upside of Saquon Barkley. He has 5 games with 36 or more DraftKings fantasy points. That's the 4th most by any running back in NFL history. 2019 Christian McCaffrey only had 4. This is more than all other running backs in football combined this year. And then like the matchup looks great. Commanders are the biggest run funnel in football this year. They're allowing the most adjusted yards per carry, yards before contact per attempt. What does that mean? They have the worst run defense in football. Like their defensive line is the worst in football. And that's a huge point because Barkley averages 10.7 yards per carry when he gets at least 2 yards before contact on any run. Again, 2.57 for Washington. So like I said, like the way I was thinking about playing it is I don't want to make a rule that's exactly like either Devonta or a Hurts stack or Barkley on every lineup, but it's something like I want to be very overweight, but where it's like Hurts or Barkley.
Okay.
I wouldn't go that extreme with it though, but just I mean like 5% Barkley, 1% Hurts. That's silly. And
both way too low. Yeah.
If you're going to play the Millie, you really want to lean into upside.
Aaron Jones, 6,400 against Seattle, 7% ownership.
So I'll say we're basically done here. We nailed my core running backs, and then I just have 2 Galaxy Brain plays. But outside of that, that's about it. And yeah, that feels really condensed, but like that's just what the good plays are, and that's kind of how the running back position historically works. It's the most predictive, or it's the easiest to project.
Yeah. All right. So am I supposed to be guessing your Galaxy Brain plays now? Is that the game we're going to?
Sure. I don't think you're going to get them.
Um.
Well, I did actually give you one already, so maybe you can.
Oh, James Cook is one that you gave me.
Yeah, so he's not a good play. Like, he does not project well, and that's right. He hasn't cleared a 45% snap share in any of his last 4 games. It's a 3-way committee with Ty Johnson and Ray Davis that is actually a 4-way committee when you factor in Josh Allen, goal line vultures. The thing is, though, he just nukes whenever Buffalo blows out a team. And it looks like Buffalo is going to blow out this Patriots team that, bottom 5 run defense. And even like last week, it was a gross 4-way committee. And he still scored nearly 30 DraftKings fantasy points. Here's the stat. Across the 9 games, the Bills have won by more than 1 score since Joe Brady took over. Cook averages 23 DraftKings fantasy points per game. He hit over 28 in 3 of those. His fantasy points per snap basically doubles anytime Buffalo has a lead. So it's just, I could see him posting a spike week and he's showing 2%. He's not a play to bet aggressively on, but he's a better play than 2% suggests.
Okay. People are going to want to know about Patrick Taylor at 5,200. He's only 4,800 on FanDuel also. Do you have any kind of read on the 49ers backfield?
No, not really. I think they could just sort of abandon the run. I think it could be a committee. And so there's just like a lot of uncertainty there for me to feel at all good, especially when there's all those other running backs I legitimately love. He could hit. I don't know. It just, to me, wasn't strong enough to make my pool.
Muhammad guessed both Jerome Ford.
He's also a 5th stringer. Like, that needs to be baked in the equation. Like, I know Kyle Shanahan's a god, but
yeah,
you can't project too much efficiency for a 5th stringer, I don't think.
DeAndre Swift against that Detroit banged up defense. Leverage off of Caleb. Do you have interest in DeAndre Swift?
I thought about it. Roshan's back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think Roshan gets all the goal line work. So didn't make my list, but I thought about it. I don't think he's a terrible play. There's also leverage off of those wide receivers and the quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. It's Jerome Ford. I mean, no Nick Chubb does have to deal with Deontay Foreman now, I guess. Same kind of thing. You're not interested for that.
I mean, I don't know. He was just kind of a headache earlier in the year without Nick Chubb. I think DTR is trash. So
yeah. All right. So Galaxy Brain.
Well, it is. I don't think it's that guy. I think he's like just a good play who's better than 4%. That's Brian Robinson.
Okay.
He's had 3 games without Eckler. 2 of his highest scoring games came in 2 of those games. Usage is really good. It's like a big uptick without Eckler. Averages 18.6 DraftKings fantasy points per game in those 3 games without Eckler. And keep in mind, he was pulled in the 4th quarter of 2 of those games. So maybe the expectation's even higher than that. It's not a good matchup. It's not good game script. But as a contrarian play, stack him with Washington's defense. I don't know. That's fine. Not sure I'll wind up with any of him, but he's a little bit better than 4%.
Okay. All right. So we've kind of, I mean, it's so condensed. Like the best running back plays are so condensed that there's kind of limits on how much we need to talk about it.
Right. Well, that's why I gave you like 10 quarterbacks.
Yeah. All right. So then we are ready to move on and talk about wide receivers. But are you ready, Scott, to take your break?
My intermission. Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
Really quick. Fantasy points right now. We are the cheapest we're going to be all year. It is our early bird special. So if you subscribe right now, cheapest we're going to be, and you don't have to pay again until April 2026. So you get the rest of this season free. You get all of next season paid for. And And so, yeah, there's plenty of DFS slates coming up. We have content all throughout the playoffs for the Super Bowl. If you're a best ball degenerate, we're going to give you content in March. My rookie draft guide, Brett's rookie draft guide. So check out the early bird special. Right now we have promo code OTB25 that expires tonight. I was supposed to pull this. I forgot to do that. So it's the cheapest we're going to be all year. And then you get this massive discount. But that's going to expire sometime tonight. So act fast on that. And I will see you in 5 minutes, Neil.
All right, perfect. All right. Well, for the rest of us, we have, remember, in 9 minutes, a second NFL game is starting. So if you have not got your showdown lineups in for the Pittsburgh-Baltimore game, make sure you get those in. If you built, like I did, for Rashad Bateman being out, he is, in fact, active for this game. I don't know if he's going to be a full go. That one is kind of up in the air. But I don't know. If I were not on a show, I'd probably try to be getting some Rashad Bateman into my lineups because he's probably going to go lower owned because we didn't know his status going into the main slate. So there's my notes on the upcoming game. But I guess I'll play around with a lineup now while Scott is gone. And like I said, so he's not going to want to build a Kyler lineup. So, and I do like Kyler. So I'm just going to throw Kyler in there. Throw McBride in there right away. Of course, Kyler said on social media this week that 85 is going to find the end zone soon. I promise. I believe it was the quote. So I think I'm playing a lot of Trey McBride. I'm going to feel really stupid when Trey McBride does not get in the end zone because he hasn't done it all year and they've been trying and it hasn't worked. But I'm buying into it because they're playing against Carolina. It's like you should be able to score however you want to against Carolina, and they want to score with Trey McBride. So I will be playing a good amount of Trey McBride this weekend along with Kyler. I do think one way to get a little bit more different is to throw the double stack in there with Marvin Harrison Jr. Now I could go Thielen, I could go Chuba Hubbard as the bring back. I'm going to think about that a bit. Who else do we like a wide receiver? I mean, I like Keenan Allen. I think should have success in this matchup. DJ Moore also. Both just look good against a very depleted Detroit defense. Gonna go Keenan Allen. I don't know. I'm torn between those two. I guess we'll get Scott's thoughts on the two of them later. I kind of like both. Might even I could even play. You could play both. I think in the same lineup, even without Caleb Williams. I do like Jacoby Myers this week. Although Scott was saying that AOC tends to like Brock Bowers better than Jacoby Myers. I still think the targets for Jacoby Myers still very high, even if it's better for Brock Bowers. So I'm going to throw Jacoby Myers into this one in a great matchup with Jacksonville. Defense, let's see. I don't know what I love it. I don't know if there's a real standout defense that's cheap here. Could go with the Raiders defense against Jacksonville and Mac Jones. Or the Jags defense against Aiden O'Connell. But they're just so bad. No, I'm going to go with Colts. I think that's kind of an interesting one. All right. 66 left per player. There are some pretty clear best running back options, and I did not save a lot of money for them. I could go. I do kind of like DeAndre Swift, so maybe I'll throw him in this lineup while Scott's away. Then I'll go to one of the chalkier running backs, and it could be Chuba Hubbard here, or James Conner. I don't remember how much Adam Thielen costs. Let's see if I could afford Adam Thielen with Connor, or do I want Connor in that stack? That's maybe not, and not quite, doesn't quite work anyway. So maybe instead of Connor, I do go Chuba Hubbard as the bring back. Now I have 5,800 left in the flex. DJ Moore is there. I could go double Chicago here. Thielen 56 could make sense here as a double bring back. Maybe that's just the way I'll play it. Just full on game stack. Kyler Murray with Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride, bring backs of both Chuba Hubbard and Adam Thielen. Jacoby Myers, one off. Keenan Allen, one off. Actually, Keenan Allen and DeAndre Swift, little mini secondary stack. Colts defense, I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to enter it. $200 in salary remaining for that one. All right. And I'm going to pull up another one here, but I'll just check in on chat, see if any of you are chatting with me rather than watching. I guess there's no football on right now. We got a little break in the football. Chris says this isn't cage match, Neil. I don't know what that means. What does that mean, Chris? You can still play the best plays even outside of cage match. I'm allowed to just play the best plays. MC Kidlet likes the Giants defense. Playing against the Falcons, I guess that makes sense. Against a rookie quarterback. I don't hate that idea. Josh says he likes Ford this week. I played Ford in the cage match. I played both Ford and DeAndre Swift. They don't project extremely well, but I needed a little bit of salary savings, and they both kind of made sense at 5,600 in the cage match for that purpose. I think I'm probably not going to have time to make another full lineup. So I'll tell you. Are you guys playing Showdown? Are you playing the one that starts in 4 minutes? I love Showdown. I did not have a ton of time to spend on my Showdown lineups for this slate because I had a ton going on today. But it appears I have 100% Lamar Jackson in my lineups, which, if I were playing 150, I would make a point of getting lower than that. I didn't play 150 because busy day. Trey says he's going to win the 100K spy this week. He has a dream lineup. Well, then Trey, you should be making lineups for us instead of me if you're going to win the 100K spy, and then maybe Scott and I should enter it instead of you. That's how that should go. Scott, how was your tinkle?
It was great. I'm not built for the marathon streams, Neil. Not like you.
Do you know that I did a marathon stream, hour and 45-minute stream starting at midnight last night?
Why?
for the 3-game slate. I started doing it on my own. I was like, all right, I'm going to just try and do this quickly. I need to do something for my channel, the Flannelverse. I was like, I want to get something up for the 2-game slate. It's kind of what I do is like short slates, Showdown, 2-game, 3-game, all the odd slates I like to do. So I didn't have time today because, as you know, I had a ton of work to do this morning. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to get it done at midnight. And then 20 minutes in, I was surprised by Fantasy Guru Drew and Justin Steele came onto the channel 20 minutes in, and I had invited them because I told them I was going live. We had been talking, and I was like, if you guys want to join, I'll put the link in Discord. And then they didn't respond to that. And then just 20 minutes in, they both show up into StreamYard. So it became a little bit of a chatting party kind of stream.
Nice.
So it was fun, but also I was up till after 3 a.m. last night. And then
what's the longest stream you've ever done?
I think I've done I feel like I might have done 8 hours during best ball when I had to remember when I was trying to get to 150 and I was way behind. I think I might have gone up to 8 hours.
I just imagine you peeing your pants every time.
Yeah, no, I wear a diaper, obviously. I mean, depends.
Okay.
That's what depends are for.
Right.
Coach Speak Index. Love to see Coach Speak Index in chat here.
Yeah, shout out to everyone in chat who's with us and not watching the game. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Did the game? I guess the other game didn't start yet.
The other game started in 2 minutes. So a reminder, make sure you get your lineups in. If you want to play some Rashad Bateman, now's the time to get him into your lineups. I'm not playing a ton of Rashad Bateman. I built without him. All right. We are ready to move on to wide receivers. Malik Neighbors is the chalkiest. Wait, am I sorted right here? Yeah, Malik Neighbors, the chalkiest. He's down to 6,100 in an ideal matchup. How concerned are we about the quarterback play? 25% ownership going there. What's your level of interest in Malik Neighbors?
Well, I think you have to be massively concerned about the quarterback play. The Giants have thrown for a touchdown in just 2 of their last 9 games. They've exceeded 200 passing yards in just 2 of their last 8 games. And so, I kind of like Neighbors as a contrarian play last week. If he's the chalkiest wide receiver on the slate, I want nothing to do with him. Volume's obviously insane. It's elite. It's the best in fantasy points data history. And so all that's great. It's another top 3 matchup. But the dude has hit 3x his current salary just once over his last 8 games. So at 25% ownership, I'm happy to get away from him.
All right. And then we get into those Chicago receivers, which we've already talked about a little bit, but DJ Moore is up there at 23% ownership at 5,700. I guess we can group Keenan Allen in there is 15% ownership at 5,300. Do you like both of the Bears top receivers? Do you like one better than the other? How are you playing them?
Yeah, I think they're both great plays, and I think that's again credence to Caleb Williams playing him or playing Jared Goff. Since Thomas Brown took over, both Keenan Allen, DJ Moore putting up top 12 numbers at the position. Keenan Allen, 10 targets per game. DJ Moore pacing the league in design targets, also getting some deep targets, or at least he did last time these two teams faced off. And when they did, Moore had 24 DraftKings fantasy points. Allen had 24. Moore's volume was a little bit better than Keenan's. He picked up an injury in this game. In spite of that, he had 16 targets. I think an additional 3 or 4 targets if you include plays negated due to penalty. He had 34.1 XFP. That was the 6th most by any wide receiver in any game this season. And then obviously Detroit's defense is just, an absolute shell of its former self. Ryan likes the schematic a little bit more for DJ Moore. To me, it's a true coin flip. They're just both great plays.
Okay. Juwan Jennings, we going back there. He's been pretty strong. 5,900 against Miami. How much Juwan Jennings do we like?
Yeah, so he's led the team in targets in 6 straight games since he came back from that injury. Would rank top 6 in target share, top 6 in first read target share. Production hasn't been great, or at least it's been hit or miss. But I think you can bake in the game Brock Purdy missed and those 2 weird weather games. If you do, he averages 23.1 fantasy points per game over that span, minus those 3 games. Maybe that's a little too heavy-handed of a split, maybe not. But the dude ranks top 7 in win rate, top 7 in yards per route run, top 7 in first downs per route run. They don't have a healthy running back. So I really like Juwan Jennings. I think he's a great play, really strong value. I think I like him a little bit more than Jacoby, but our projections disagree with that.
Interesting. Okay. Deebo Samuel, as long as we're on the Niners, down to 5,200. Do we think he has anything left? Can Deebo still do it? 8% ownership?
No, I don't think so. I think he's fat. You saw that picture. You look pretty fat. And, we have some elite connections, inside sources here at Fantasy Points. And so DJ Moore had that record-breaking game. And the following year, our source told us to fade Deebo, draft Ayuk, because Deebo showed up to camp out of shape. I think that's exactly what happened. I think he has conditioning issues. I think he's fat, and I don't want to play him.
All right, fair enough. I mean, you already talked a little bit about liking Juwan Jennings better than Jacoby Myers.
It's really close. It's just like those guys are the same price, right? And so projections like Jacoby a little bit more. I think I like Juwan a little bit more, but it's really close. Jacoby, he's had a brutal strength of schedule over the span, but in games where Ritter attempted fewer than 18 passes, averages 15.8 XFP per game, 16.7 DraftKings fantasy points per game. Those are all low end wide receiver 1 numbers. He's not priced like it. He's the wide receiver 20 on the slate. And it's a top 3 matchup. So really strong play, really good value. Again, it's tough between him and Juwan. They're both really good plays, good value. And you see this range being a sort of sweet spot at the position, this 5K to 6K range. And there's clearly plenty of options to like there this week.
Sandwiched between them in ownership is Brian Thomas Jr. at 6,300, 20% ownership. Had that awesome game last week. Do you think he can do it again?
Yeah, I just love this player. I think he's really good. I think he's insanely talented. He had those 3 games where he was like visibly hurt. You just watch the games. That was obvious. He was like extremely limited on the practice report, every single, potential practice. But so outside of those 3 games where he was hurt, 17.4 fantasy points per game, 2.63 yards per route run, both would rank about wide receiver 8. And then since the bye, 29% target share, 89 yards per game, 22.6 fantasy points per game. Those are all top 5 numbers. You're seeing him get more screen targets to bolster his floor, and he has that obvious big play upside on top of it. I think he's just really good at football. I think, quarterback play is still a concern, but the volume, I think we can be confident is going to be there. Not the best matchup on paper, like surprisingly tougher that might be partially game script related. I don't know, but yeah, I just love this guy. So he's always in play. He hit in a big way for us last week. I think I had like 70% exposure to him last week, so that was awesome.
That is awesome. Jamar Chase is 8,500. That stack becomes pretty expensive, but maybe worth playing. I don't know. 17% ownership going to Jamar Chase. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, you just look at his numbers. There's an argument to be made. He should be 10,500 instead of 8,500. 24 fantasy points per game. That's the third most by any wide receiver over the last 10 seasons. 30% more DraftKings fantasy points per game than Justin Jefferson. It's only $300 more expensive. No wide receiver has the spike week upside that Jamar Chase has, the potential to absolutely bury a slate. This is an elite matchup on paper. Brown's very vulnerable to the deep ball. It is an elite schematic matchup. The counter argument to all this is we kind of already saw this play out, right? These two teams faced off 4 or so weeks ago. DTR had 20 plus pass attempts, and it's just the Bengals were never really pushed. And so Chase didn't do anything. So that's the concern to me. I worry that it's a Chase Brown game, and Burrow never really has to try that hard because DTR is just awful.
Yeah.
But he's still a great play. He could smash in 2 quarters. He's Jamar Chase. He's awesome, etc.
JSN and DK Metcalf both at 15% ownership. JSN and 6,000. DK Metcalf 5,500. Do you like both of them? Do you have a preference? What do you think?
Yeah. So initially, like, I wasn't even going to write up DK Metcalf, even though he's 5,500, which is the cheapest he's been since week 8 of 2019. It's just JSN's been on this incredible hot streak, 70 receiving yards in 6 straight games, 4th in yards per game, 4th in fantasy points per game, 3rd in fantasy points per route run. And so there's that consistency, the upside. But volume's been basically neck and neck. So it feels like this production's a little unsustainable. The matchup's a little bit more favorable to Metcalf. And then I wrote up Metcalf, and I kind of, because of our guy Coach Speak Index, who's in the chat, I actually put him above JSN in my rankings. I was hoping Coach Speak would not tweet this out, but he did in fact tweet it out, and he actually moved the prop line on DK. The Coach Speak on DK was crazy. Ryan Grubb came out and said, was asked about DK's usage. He said, it bothered me. It pissed me off that I couldn't get him the ball more. Guy like that, you have to get him the ball more. It doesn't matter if they're bracketing him or what. He needs the ball, etc. It was unreal Coach Speak. And again, cheapest he's been since 2019. The matchup is also more in his favor. Even with Stephon Gilmore back, I think they're a little more vulnerable to the perimeter. More than that, they're a bottom 5 defense against the deep ball, which is huge for DK Metcalf, who leads the league in deep targets per game. He's been unlucky. He's been running bad in that department. All he needs to do is connect on 2 of those to break the slate potentially. And this is a defense that is bottom 5 in yards per game allowed on deep passes. So ultimately, I like both guys. I see good upside. I see good value. Really close. I think a slight edge to Metcalf. The Coach Speak really won me over.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to bring up the Coach Speak. It was pretty fun. Puka Nacua, 12% ownership at 8,000. What do we like? Do we like 12% Puka Nacua?
Yeah, I said this earlier. I said I love me some Puka Adams minis this week.
Oh, yeah.
Puka leads all wide receivers in a landslide by yards per route run, fantasy points per route run by a landslide, XFP per route run by a landslide. In 7 of 7 games with a snap share over 35%, he scored 17.3 fantasy points in all 7, averages 24.6 DraftKings fantasy points per game. In those games, out targets Cooper Kupp 75 to 50. And so I think Chase, has more upside, a greater potential to break the slate, but I think Nacua ultimately hits 4x value more often. If like we simulated this slate out 100 times, I think Nakua hits 4x more often. And I kind of like him a little bit more at ownership. Yeah. And digging into the matchup, the Jets look a little bit more vulnerable to the slot. They're down their starting slot cornerback. They're bottom 3 against the slot over their last 5 games. Against outside wide receivers, they're like fringe bottom 12. So it's not exactly a bad matchup for Puka. But what's crucial to me here, so by the way, it's a perfect schematic for Puka. But on top of that, we saw this against the Bills, which are a premier slot funnel. What happened? Sean McVay jacked Puka's slot rate up to 63% when it's typically at 30%. So that signals to me that Puka is the clear alpha, and McVay is going to go out of his way to get him the matchups he needs to succeed. So again, I really like Puka. I really like Puka plus Adams minis. And Kupp could still hit. He could score multiple touchdowns, 80 yards, something like that. So if you wanted to play a Stafford double or with Rodgers, you could do that. But yeah, love me some Puka. Probably gonna have a little bit more of him than Chase personally.
Yeah, I think you've talked me into a little bit more Puka than I was planning on playing. So we're not afraid of like Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed. None of the individual cornerback matchups just haven't been that tricky this year.
Well, again, I think they're kind of all playing hurt this year is my vibe, but more than that, it's again, McVay is just going to get Puka the matchups he needs.
Yeah. Okay. Do we play in any? So Drake London is 6,400, getting 10% ownership. Darnell Mooney, and somebody just asked about him in chat, is 5,400, getting 2% ownership. So let's talk about the Atlanta receivers. If we're playing some Michael Penix, do you have a preference with how to stack him? Other than you already mentioned Bijan Robinson and the lack of throw into the receivers. So maybe you don't have any interest in either, but tell me, do you have any interest in Mooney or London?
I just really don't know. This isn't something I'm going to be able to project well. It's with rookie wide receivers, you can see them just totally latch on to the wide receiver one and like just force feed them a 40% target share. But it's also Michael Penix was heralded as having the best deep ball of any quarterback prospect since Russell Wilson. And so, maybe that's the perfect quarterback for a Darnell Mooney who, has really gone out of his way to adjust for this quarterback change. He worked out his high school quarterback who was a lefty and he's played really well. And he's cheaper. Yeah, I don't know. I think the only way I get to either of those wide receivers is Penix. And the only way I get to Penix is if I have a lineup that's otherwise perfect and just needs that 4,500 quarterback.
Okay. Adam Thielen is 5,600, getting 10% ownership. David Moore currently projected for 7% ownership at 3,600. Jalen Coker, and as you mentioned, questionable, but Jalen Coker, 4,200 projected for 3% ownership. So do you have any interest in any of these Carolina receivers?
Yeah, and Legette's out. Yeah, I like Thielen the most for sure. I know Coker stole the show, but he scored like 80% of his fantasy points on one big play. Thielen actually had a season high route share. His first read target share was right where we wanted it to be. It was, first game back 16%, then 25%, then 41%, then 39% last week. If not for that one bad call from the refs, he'd be averaging 9.3 targets, 22 DraftKings fantasy points per game over his last 3 games. Arizona is like a tough defense. This isn't exactly a good matchup, but they are a slot funnel. And it is a good schematic matchup. So yeah, I like Thielen for sure. I think 10% is might be worth coming in a little above that.
All right. I know that you're going to love Wan'Dale Robinson with Drew Lock throwing the ball. Like this is what it's going to take to get you to love Wan'Dale, right?
I would rather chop both of my thumbs off than win $1 million playing Wan'Dale Robinson.
All right. I'm going to give you that opportunity on next week's Outside the Box. Scott going to be cutting off his thumbs. All right. Trying to see if there's any other like really interesting. T. Higgins, 6,800. Any interest there?
Yeah, 4% silly. Like, all right. So he's 21st by ownership. Now click on fantasy points per dollar and tell me where he winds up. Higgins, yeah, 7th. So like clearly that should be one of our conviction plays this week. All injury experts think we should expect a full normal workload for him, and if that's the case, he's clearly a value. Since week 4, 8th in XFP per game, 9th in fantasy points per game, really steady by first read target share. So he's a strong play.
All right. We talked about, oh, sorry, I got to sort by ownership again. Okay. That's where I'm confused here. Tyreek Hill, 6,900.
Oh, baby. Yeah, this one's a little tricky. And so it like really comes down to whether or not you think Tyreek is dusty, or maybe that's not all it comes down to, but that's a big question. Because like what happened last year without Jalen Waddle, Tyreek had a nearly 40% target share, 22 DraftKings fantasy points per game. This is far and away his best schematic matchup of the season, or at least his best since the Jets. And he went off against the Jets, and so it really could be the Tyreek spot. I will just say, last week, Waddle had that injury in the first quarter, right, or the second quarter, and so from that point on, Malik Washington, who's 3,700, had basically the same amount of routes, the same amount of targets as Tyreek Hill, had more receiving yards. It's not really a good matchup for Malik. 49ers are elite against the slot, but yeah, you can make a case for Malik as a strong value at 3,700. You Tyreek, like what if we just see, a vintage spike week from Tyreek? I have wide receiver plays I'm a lot more excited to play, but he's certainly someone who warrants this deep look in conversation.
Okay. All right. So you have wide receiver plays that you love. Let me see if I can.
I mentioned one like 12 times. I'm just itching to talk about it.
Well, then let's talk about him. Tell me. Is it AJ Brown?
No, it's Devontae Adams.
That's what I said. Devontae Adams.
That's who you said.
All right. Let's talk about Devontae Adams then.
Okay. So I crafted this narrative, which I'm so excited to tell you about. But before we get there, you don't even need the narrative. He leads all players in target share since week 9. Even before last week's season high 40% target share, he still led all wide receivers in target share. He's seen at least 11 targets in 3 straight games. He hit 18 fantasy points, then 29 fantasy points, then 46 last week, 198 yards, second most he's ever seen in his career. Maybe this was just the Jaguars. Maybe this is unsustainable. Rodgers, up until 2 weeks ago was over 1,000 days removed from his last 300-yard game. But it's another great matchup. The Rams bottom 3 to outside wide receivers. And here's the narrative. I think Garrett Wilson might be in the doghouse because you saw that shot of the camera of Wilson screaming at Aaron Rodgers, when I'm one-on-one, just throw me the fade. And like, who is Rodgers? But a guy who holds grudges, who's petty and sensitive and insecure, right? Or supposedly, that's the narrative, right? And he threw guys under the bus and then like drove it in reverse over their head, like Davis Maddox boy. Who's the white wide receiver who's not good?
On which team? On the Jets
Packers.
now?
No, on the Packers. Who didn't have any hands.
Jordy Nelson?
No, the other one.
Oh, bad white Ben. No, not Ben Skoranek. He's not on the Packers.
Hyper athletic. He made a big play in the playoffs, but that's all he ever did.
I don't remember. Jeff Janis.
Right. Jeff Janis. There you go. Yeah. I don't know why I couldn't remember.
I didn't know that he was Davis Maddox boy. Okay.
No, it was Davis Maddox boy. And so I think he might be in the doghouse, and like you saw that play out. So after that sideline tirade, Wilson had a 9.5% target share. Adams had a 45%. Wilson scored 1.5 fantasy points. Adams had 180 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 2-point conversion. And it's not just that, but it's also motivation. What are the Jets playing for? Like, I really think all they're playing for, all Aaron Rodgers is trying to do, is to help him and his BFF, who moved halfway across the country for him, get a fat new contract. So you're going to see some stat padding. Maybe I've fallen a little too in love with this narrative I've crafted myself, but I'm into it. I really like Adams. I like the bring back with Puka. I think that's fun. So that's probably one of my conviction plays this week.
All right. I like it. That's a fun narrative. Anybody in chat watching the game, how seriously hurt is Joey Porter Jr.? Because I see he's injured according to the feed, making me a little bit nervous. All right. So you love Devontae Adams. I mean, you talked about liking Jalen Hurts. So are you interested in AJ Brown or Devonta Smith at all?
Well, I like Devonta a little bit more because, AJ Brown just himself admitted he's not quite 100%. You did see Devonta outscore him and have more targets. It was very close last week. But I think if I'm playing Hurts, I might just lean into the dub stack.
Okay.
And then without Hurts, I don't know that I need a lot of Devonta, but he's in play.
All right.
Jordan Addison really stands out there at 4%. I think
Yeah.
if you play Darnold, like I said, he's a must. You need that for Darnold to really go off. But you just look at what he's done. Like he looks like a top 5 wide receiver. He's priced as the wide receiver 14. He's beaten out Justin Jefferson in both target share, first read target share, fantasy points per game over the last 5 games. Ranks second in fantasy points per game, 4th in yards per route run, 11th in XFP per game. He's wide receiver 14 by price. And so 4% seems pretty bad to me.
Jefferson, you also mentioned you had some interest in earlier, just getting 2% ownership. How much interest do you have there?
I'm not playing him outside of Darnold teams.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So not that much interest. All right. Let's see. Who else? Are you stacking Josh Allen like you playing Khalil Shakir, Amari Cooper?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
And that's partly why I like Hurts more than Allen.
Yeah. Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, he's a really good play. I think Mason Rudolph is a big upgrade for him. I don't think people are really appropriately factoring in just how awful and historically awful Will Levis is. And so if you look at over, what is it? His last just about 10 quarters with Mason Rudolph under center, Ridley averages 11 targets, 17 fantasy points, 20 XFP per 4 full quarters. Those are all, top 3 numbers, fantasy points per game, top 10. And his price is the wide receiver 22. And who is this? This is a player that has a lot of upside, has really high spike week potential. He leads all players in air yards this year. Just doesn't see a lot of catchable air yards. So I really like him as a tournament play.
All right. I don't know that I have many other names to throw at you. I really like Marvin Harrison Jr. down at 5,400 elite matchup. I know you're not as into Kyler. Do you have any interest in a 4% of Marvin Harrison Jr.?
I don't personally. I see this as an elite matchup for Trey McBride over and above any matchup for Harrison. It's also just like the guy's been a total bust. I mean, just like seriously underwhelmed expectations. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's Trey McBride week if it's any Arizona pass catcher. I think he scores a touchdown this week, by the way, too.
All right. I mean, yeah. Kyler said as much, more or less said as much. All right. Any other wide receivers that we need? I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I saw down here. We talked about him a little bit earlier. 2% ownership, 7,900.
Yeah, like I mentioned with the Goff section is like the crazy stat I put out is Detroit's only had like 4 or 5 games with a positive pass rate over expectation. But in those games, like he's averaging 28 fantasy points per game, 13 targets per game, 150 yards per game. All other games, he's like, 60 yards per game. So tremendous upside there. So I like that stack with Goff. But I don't know how eager I am to play it outside of Goff lineups.
I want to ask you about Rome Odunze because his 2 teammates are getting pretty chalky. Rome Odunze still, I think, like 36 targets over the past 5 weeks, so over 7 targets per game. He's 5,100, getting 1% ownership. How do you like Rome as leverage off of his teammates?
So Jake and I were doing this thing where like he would write up his Galaxy Brain plays and like I would delete it because I'm like, this is too Galaxy Brain. Or I'd write up Galaxy Brain plays and he would delete it. He's like, oh, this is too Galaxy. But like every time we deleted it, that player went off.
Yeah.
And so this is Jake's call, but like I'm into it. He was like, don't you dare delete. And the argument's there. It just seems like he's so unlucky, like fluky bad luck. Since Thomas Brown took over, leads the league in end zone targets, ranked 7th in air yards. He's like woefully underproduced that because he's just not really seeing catchable end zone targets or catchable air yards. But that seems like fluky bad luck. And, maybe those are catchable this week up against Detroit's beleaguered defense and low ownership when the other guys are super chalky. So it makes a ton of sense. He has that profile where it's, a lot of upside. He'll get 3 deep targets, right? And for whatever reason, only 0.25 are catchable per week. But like with league average quarterback play, there should be like, every other week or every third week, he posts like a 26-point game.
Yeah. So play him, cross your fingers, don't watch the game kind of thing with Romo Dunze. Yeah. Are we playing the Ascot at all this week? I mean, we got both of his, both Pittman and Downs are in, so it's a little bit tougher to play Adnan Mitchell at 3,800. Do you have any interest there?
Oh man, I would lose so much money in sub revenue if I said go all in on the Ascot. We would just overwhelmed by refund requests. So that's what scares me about it. But I mean, like the thesis holds. The dude ranks top 3 in AS. He ranks top 3 in XFP per route run. I still don't think he's going to be like an 80% route share guy. It would still be 60%. And then again, you have a quarterback averaging like 10 completions per game. Who, by the way, like for a guy who supposedly has a cannon, he ranks dead last in deep completion rate this year. So really tough to trust, but like at that price relative to the upside, I think it's fine. And hey, if Anthony Richardson suffers an injury in the first quarter, that hits in a big way.
Yeah. I assume all Browns receivers are dead now.
Yep. So sad, dude. So sad.
It is.
I circled this game for weeks.
Why would they take that away from us? Like this is going to be such an exciting game. They just ripped it away from us for no reason.
Now we need to get Stefanski fired because this is all we had, and he took it away from us.
Yeah. I guess the reason I can't say no reason. It's probably the like 3 interceptions per game is the reason, I guess. But come on, it was fun. Let us have it. Ray McLeod is 4,500. Still kind of seeing like running all the routes.
Yeah, I'm not chasing that.
Anybody else that you want to talk about?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, then let's not talk about anybody else. Let's move on and let's talk about some tight ends. Tight ends are kind of fun this week. Brenton Strange is the chalk at 3,500, getting 33% ownership after just massive target share last week. Kind of, I thought, unexpectedly. How much interest do you have in Brenton Strange here?
No, it wasn't that unexpected. I really beat myself up for even thinking it was close between who is it? Stone Smart in the Will Dissly role versus Strange and the Engram. Like the Engram role is so much more valuable. And not just that, but it's Mac Jones who historically like loves tight ends. He's targeted tight ends at a top 6 rate across his career. Strange had 12 first read targets last week. That was the second most by any tight end in any game this year. They don't have anyone healthy besides him and BTJ. It's a top 5 matchup for him. He's produced just about every week, even when without Engram, even when Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis were healthy. He might be the best tight end chalk we've had all season. Honestly, he probably is.
All right, counterpoint to thinking we should have seen it coming. I mean, Mac Jones may have loved his tight ends, but he was playing with Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, Mike Gesicki. Like they were trying to make these guys a thing, and none of them ever did anything.
Yeah, that's true. Henry had touchdowns. There was the neighbor narrative. They were next door neighbors, and he had like 8 touchdowns in 9 games one year, maybe his rookie year.
All right, fair enough.
But I don't know that he's neighbors with Strange, so maybe that's your argument.
Yeah, maybe he just doesn't like his neighbors. He doesn't get along with his neighbors, so he just throws to the tight ends if they're not his neighbor. Okay.
He's
now
the
we
reverse
know.
Mr. Rogers.
Trey McBride coming in at 15% ownership at 6,200. You sort of alluded to thinking it's a good matchup for Trey McBride. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, it's a top 3 on paper matchup against the Panthers. It's a perfect schematic matchup. It's a player who's just like balling the F out. He ranks 6th among all players in target share. This is the most by any tight end in fantasy points data history. In leagues where touchdowns are worth 0 fantasy points, he would be the wide receiver 9 by fantasy points per game. If you spotted him just 4 additional yards twice, he'd have season highs of 28, 25, 24, 21, 19, 18 fantasy points, 22.4 fantasy points per game in his top 50% of games. All this without a touchdown. So you just like throw a touchdown onto any of those games. That's a top 5 wide receiver performance. He's not quite priced like that. Tight end position typically more devoid of upside. And I think he scores a touchdown this week. It's not just Kyler Murray promising us a touchdown, but he's had 4 end zone targets over his last 5 games, 6 inside the 10 targets over that span. Over his first 8 games, he just had 1 of each. So they're really going out of their way to try and get him this touchdown. And so I see why the projections really like him. I think that's right. It's what's happening is very fluky. He ranks 3rd in XTD per game. That's going to regress to the mean.
Yeah. As I was writing up, I was like, has he not had a touchdown in his entire career? I had to look it up. No, he had 3 last year, and I think 1 in his rookie year too. So not as bad of luck as I thought it was, but still not great. Jonnu Smith, 5,500, getting 15% ownership. He's been kind of your guy all along. I know you loved him last week. That worked out pretty well. It's been working out pretty well basically every week. We going back to it?
I mean, the numbers are just insane. You look at over his last 5 games, and it made sense he didn't do anything 2 weeks ago. It just antithetical schematic matchup for him. It was much better for the wide receivers, but last 5 games, 9 targets per game, 79 yards per game, 22 DraftKings fantasy points per game, all high-end wide receiver 1 numbers above and beyond Tyreek Hill. And so I think we can trust that. It's a perfect schematic matchup for him. The only problem is 49ers are great against tight ends. It's always been the case with Fred Warner there. Maybe it's different with Jonnu, just in how they use him. They give him a lot of design stuff. But that is a small concern for me, which is why I'm not ready to go all in on him. But yeah, Price as the wide receiver 26, putting up wide receiver 1 numbers. He's a great play.
You already mentioned Brock Bowers being this being a better matchup for Brock Bowers than Jacoby Myers. He's getting 9% ownership. I guess I just skipped over Hunter Henry. So maybe we want to talk about Hunter Henry first. He's 4,100, getting 14% ownership. Did you have thoughts on 14% going to Hunter Henry?
He's like the poor man's Trey McBride. Like he's clearly the number 1 receiver for the team. He's had 8 targets in 5 of Drake May's last 7 full games. 11 fantasy points per game. That's solid. 0 touchdowns. So if he scores a touchdown, like he could be a great play. I don't think he's as good as 14% ownership suggests, but he's fine.
How about Brock Bowers at 9% ownership, 6,500? Nice matchup. Can Aiden O'Connell make him a thing again?
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. He had a 16% target share with Desmond Ridder, 25% with AOC. AOC has favored him a little bit more than Jacoby. And yeah, you look at his numbers without Ridder, it's 9.5 targets, 80 yards, 17.5 fantasy points per game, all mid-range to low-end wide receiver 1 numbers. He's priced as like the wide receiver 12. It's a top 7 matchup. I think he's a good play. You know, like I don't think he's amazing, but I think he's right there with Trey McBride, Jonnu, and Kittle.
Okay.
It's just like a really strong tier where it's kind of tough to pick between them.
Yeah. What about Sam Laporta? 8% ownership, and I kind of was sort of wanted to ask this earlier. With Dave Montgomery out, do you think any extra usage goes to Sam Laporta as a result?
Yeah, I haven't really looked at that. I think that could make sense. I think if Gibbs was out, I would be more into that. But
Okay.
it's Montgomery has been seeing a lot of targets this year, well above the year before last. So Laporta, I do think is interesting. So like you brought him up a lot in the show, and I was just like, no, I think he's hurt. I think he's hurt. I think he's hurt. And he's had season high in targets in back-to-back games, at least 6 targets in 5 straight, averaging 7 targets per game. That's up from 3.2 in like the first half of the season. He had 111 yards. This is his first game over 66 since last year. I know Goff had 500, but still like just like an encouraging sign. I think he's a fine play. You know, not super excited to play him, but he's fine.
Okay.
He's
Hawkinson.
good.
Yeah.
Hawkinson's okay. You know, he's back to that full-time route share. It's a good schematic for him up against Seattle's man coverage. He's all right. He's okay.
Fair. George Kittle. So 6% ownership going to George Kittle. So I guess not as unowned as I thought he might be, but he's $6,000, sort of a pay up to be contrarian option. How much do we like Kittle here?
I really like him. I battled Chris in the projections, McBride versus Kittle, where it's like he's like, I can't not have McBride so much higher when his target share is like the highest we've ever seen from a tight end. I'm like, yeah, but one guy scores touchdowns and one guy doesn't. He's like, yeah, but it's fluky. And I'm like, all right, you're right. It is fluky, but it's also what's happening. I don't know. I really like Kittle. If you exclude the 2 bad weather games, the blizzard game, week 15 rain game, you don't exclude the game Purdy missed, Kittle has scored at least 14.5 fantasy points in 9 of 9 games. No other tight end has more than 7. He's averaging 20 DraftKings fantasy points per game. That would lead all tight ends by 33%. That would rank behind only Jamar Chase and Chris Godwin. And he's a tight end. And Miami's a tight end funnel defense and a top 5 matchup for him. So I really like Kittle. Like I said, I think it's close in that Bowers, McBride, Jonnu tier. Like if I'm an MME guy like yourself, I'd have all those guys fairly tight. But you could also just go all in on Strange because he's a sick value.
Yeah. Who else? I mean, Michael Mayer, like pretty strong usage. Last week.
That's a concern I have with Bowers. Like you haven't seen it in the route share. The target share has come down. Is that just because of Ritter? Could it be Mayer? I don't know. It didn't really impact him at all prior to Ritter coming in, but it is like a little nitpick I have that might boost Kittle, that boosts Kittle and Jonnu above him. Maybe. Right. I don't know. It's tough. It's a headache.
But then did you say, do you have any interest in Mayer himself at 2,900?
No, I don't.
Okay. I think I do. Like we saw like back-to-back weeks of 65% route participation. 2 weeks ago, we had 9 targets. Last week, he only had 2 targets, but that was with Desmond Ritter, who couldn't even get Brock Bowers going. So I'm like, that's sort of interesting to me in a best possible matchup for Michael Mayer. But fair enough.
He's cleared 11 receiving yards once this year.
But it was 2 weeks ago when he clearly. And all the coach speak is shout out Coach Speak Index. All the coach speak is like 12 personnel is our best personnel. Like talking about how much they want to go use 2 tight ends.
The data backs it up because team ass Raiders have the worst team ass at the wide receiver position. So like it's legitimately the case that Michael Mayer is your 3rd best receiver. Like that's 100% true.
Yeah.
DJ Turner, get real. What are we doing?
Scott, I'm not going to really spend a lot of time boring you with this, but I just have to say how pained it is for me that Van Jefferson, who was one of my flag plants in DFS this week, got tackled at the 1 yard line, almost scored a touchdown. So then I'm like, all right, well, I have Najee Harris on my favorite best ball team remaining, and I've got Jalen Warren on another team. So just first down, 1st and 1 at the goal line. Sorry, 1st and goal at the 1 yard line. They threw a touchdown to Michael Pruitt. The one Steelers receiver that I don't have anywhere.
Oh my goodness!
I am in so much pain that Michael Pruitt was the player to score a touchdown. 1st and 1, 1st and goal at the 1. Just so painful for me.
Wow.
All right. That's enough time on that. Ben Sinnott, 2,800 no Zach Ertz, or at least I think he's at least doubtful. So Ben Sinnott might get his opportunity here. Do you have any interest there?
No, I don't. I would just find the way to get up to Strange. He doesn't have more. He has 4 catches all year. It's just like,
yeah.
No.
Any
60% route share last week, 1 catch, 7 yards, 1 target. Yeah, I'm good.
Do you have any other tight ends that you like?
Yeah, Chigo Conquo is solid. His target per route run gets a big bump with Mason Rudolph, nearly doubles. And he was already second in targets per route run over the last 3 weeks. He's still a really thin play, but gets a best possible matchup. He's a fine punt. David Njoku, just like if DTR is not horrible, would be a sick play. DTR's favorite receiver, 25% target share, right up there with like what I said AOC and Bowers was, which is like an insane number. Over his last 2 games, 21.7 fantasy points per game on 30 targets in 2 games. That was the most of any player over that stretch, despite dealing with a really bad hamstring injury for the second half of one of those games. It's a top 3 matchup on paper. Unfortunately, this is just still like super gal brained. I'm probably not going to play him because unfortunately, like DTR stinks.
Yeah, fair.
But if you want to go insane and play a DTR lineup, that's who you stack him with.
All right.
Higgins and Chase, because thesis being that they get pushed.
Right.
I can't do it, but someone can.
You want to make some lineups?
Let's do it.
Is it that time? All right.
It's that time.
I made a Kyler lineup without you, so we don't have to make a Kyler lineup. We can just make.
I appreciate it.
Caleb, I know you like Caleb. We can make a Hertz lineup if you'd like.
Well, I want to talk a little game theory.
All right.
So your former boss, Alex Baker, Awesemo, I would watch some of his shows back when he was doing content. And it's really interesting. Like the guy would always be like, do you like this chalky quarterback? He's like, no. Do you like this, good quarterback? And he's like, no. And he's like, okay, so who do you like? And he's like, I really like Zach Wilson this week. And it would always just like break my brain. And it's like, how could you wind up on Zach, who's never had a spike week? And like, he would, every single show would always like the sub 3% owned guys.
Yeah.
And so like last week, Alex was like top 15 in the FanDuel 250, top 15 with like multiple entries in the DraftKings because he was all in on Aaron Rodgers, who we also liked. And like, I just think, and this is what I've heard from like multiple pros who I've talked to who are in our Discord. There's just so much upside to the cheap quarterback, the cheap low owned quarterback. If that stack hits, and it's like a calculated bet where you have to get fewer things right. And so I think we've been like approaching this the wrong way. I think, because like I'll start at the top of my article, right? But we're building milli lineups. Maybe I should start all the way at the bottom of the article and find my grossest quarterback play, because I've complained about this in Discord every single week where it's like, if I played my, lowest dollar tournament entry, like the daily dollar lineup, if I threw that in the SPY, I would have, finished top 5. Right. And I say that every week and so, we need to get more aggressive, be a little more contrarian. So maybe we start with one of these 3% or less quarterbacks.
3%. So that would not be Aiden O'Connell, right? Let's see. No, Aiden O'Connell getting 5%, not too bad there. Sam Darnold fits the bill. Jalen Hurts is just 1%.
All right, let's do our Hurts lineup. I was kind of hoping for a cheap low own, but yeah, we could do Hurts.
I mean, Aiden O'Connell would be the like sort of low owned 5% if we want to go cheap.
Okay, whichever one.
I prefer the Aiden O'Connell personally.
Okay. All right, let's do that.
Then I assume we throw Brock Bowers in there immediately.
Yep. Myers, not Mayer.
Yeah. I was thinking Jacoby Myers probably the next best. also.
BTJ bring back. Easy game.
Easy game. Defense. Giants against. Do we want to play Giants against? This is a shout out from chat. The Giants defense looks pretty good. It makes some sense against Michael Penix.
I like Titans defense. I think our projections like Raiders defense the most, but that wouldn't make sense for us. So what about Titans defense?
Yeah, let's do that.
I mean, oh, actually, no. To your credit, Giants defense is awful, but they are against a rookie quarterback making his first start. They're fine.
Right. We probably want to go a little bit cheap at our third wide receiver spot because I think we're probably going to want to play some of the chalkier running back.
I do think we play the chalk running back.
So then who can we find that's a cheap wide receiver? Wan'Dale Robinson. Perfect.
No.
Malik. We can go Malik Washington.
Adonai for the brand.
Would you want to do Adonai for the brand? Oh, we're playing Titans defense though.
Yeah, let's do Malik for right now.
Could be a double tight end.
Yeah, you could play Strange there. Let's do Gibbs.
Yeah.
And then Connor or Chase Brown probably.
Gibbs and I mean we actually have plenty of salary.
Let's do Chase Brown.
4,800 left still at the flex.
And it's like an awkward spot.
It is kind of an awkward. TJ Hawkinson. Sam Laporta's there.
Yeah. All right. Let's see what we could do with Connor.
$5,400. So that would be Keenan Allen.
Oh, done.
Darnell Mooney, Marvin Harrison Jr. You like Keenan Allen?
Yeah.
Boom. Leaves 100 on the table. Aiden O'Connell, double stack with Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers. Brian Thomas Jr. on the bring back. We've got a James Conner one-off, Jahmyr Gibbs one-off, Malik Washington one-off, Keenan Allen one-off, and Titans defense. Looks good. I think that's a strong Millie Maker lineup. Beautiful. Well done. All right, let's do another one. Oh, did I just enter? Oops. No, it says enter now. Okay, good. I was like, damn, I didn't mean to enter that in the 555.
Yeah, and then you would have pulled it out and it would have shipped everything.
Yeah, probably. All right. So we did AOC. Do we want to do a Caleb?
Sure.
Double with DJ and Keenan.
Remember, I'm not giving you guys my super secret quarterback stacks, so see, I'm
kind of rude.
It.
Kind of rude, to be honest, in my opinion.
Yeah.
All right, so there's the core.
Yeah, but I mean, how owned is this going to be? Do we want to get crazy and throw St. Brown on there?
Yeah, that might make sense.
Or pivot it to a Goff? Just questions I'm asking.
These are questions that you're asking. I don't think we're going to be able to afford to pivot to Goff. We can see. So now we want to go cheap. I mean, if we throw Strange in here, now we need to be really weird with our last few spots. If we do throw Strange in here, this could be a Michael Mayer lineup, a Ben Simmett lineup. No, Brenton Strange. Is that who you want?
Yeah, why not? Let me just eat that chalk inside the box.
This
rebrand.
Show is now rebranded inside the box. Okay. We could play Patriots defense. 2,100. I mean, Josh Allen can turn it over from time to time.
I don't know.
All right, fine. Giants defense.
Sure.
All right, so we're actually okay. 6,100 left per player now. So we should probably play a lower owned running back rather than just like fully eating the chalk. So maybe this is a good James Cook lineup, actually. How does that sound to you?
That sounds great by me.
Patrick Taylor would fit at 5,200. Deebo Samuel, Alexander Madison, Romo Dunze. If we want to go triple stack, I guess that's another way to get different.
Bit much. It's a bit
probably
much.
A bit much. Yeah. TJ Hawkinson again.
Here, scroll up. See if we can just full punt. Or why don't we play Bills defense and then let's play Bills defense and then play a tight end in the flex.
All right, who got it 4,000?
Malik Washington, Chigo Okonkwo, Adonai Mitchell.
Do you want to play the Ask God?
Yeah, for the brand.
All right, let's play it.
The brand.
There you go. 200 left over. Caleb doubled up with Moore and Allen. Gibbs on the bring back. James Cook one off to bring this down from the total chalk. Amon-Ra St. Brown actually a second bring back that's kind of lower owned. Brenton Strange chalk. Adonai Mitchell going to be really low owned for the brand and Bills defense. Leaves 200 on the table. Looks good.
What if we took out Gibbs? Is there any way?
Yeah, I mean that would be one way to avoid massive chalk if we took out Gibbs.
I just think he
Chase Brown
no matter what. But he's
Chase Brown.
7,500.
I mean, you do Chase Brown there.
There's a chance he gets no touchdowns.
There is a chance,
but it's like, don't the Lions average 3 running back touchdowns per game?
But what if it's just Amon-Ra St. Brown? What if?
Could be.
What do you want? What do you want Gibbs or do you want Chase Brown?
Oh no, I want Gibbs.
Okay, I figured that was the case, but all right. Gibbs in there. $200 left over. Boom. There you go. 3 lineups built on the stream. Did you want to do another one or?
No, that's okay.
All right, we're done. We are done with the stream. Scott, it's been fun as usual. What else do you have coming up the rest of the weekend? Where can people find you? All that stuff.
Yeah, check out the early bird special, fantasypoints.com. You sign up, cheapest will be all year. Use promo code OTP25, expires very soon. And you won't owe us money again until April 2026. Really good deal. See you in Discord tomorrow, and check out my show with John Proctor tomorrow morning. What about you?
And also worth noting while we're on the show that there's a lot of other content next week because we got a Christmas slate. We've got another Saturday slate next week. So also a good time to sign up for Fantasy Points with all of these extra slates coming up. Tomorrow I will be, my article on the Sunday Night Football slate will be up at Fantasy Points tomorrow. I'll be doing a breakdown of that on my YouTube channel, The Flannelverse, about 85 minutes prior to lock of Sunday Night Football. So those are the big things that I have coming up in the short term. And then, of course, we'll have some content coming out next week for all the extra slates as well. All right, this is fun. Thank you, Scott, as always. Thank you all for hanging out with us while there is football being played, or if you're watching later. Appreciate that also. If you would subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment, all of that is very helpful for us. We would very much appreciate it. Thank you, guys. We will catch you next week on Outside the Box. See you then.
What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.